Hi guys. I'm concentrating on the speaking preparation now. Like I'm preparing my answers, and it's really taking me a while because I haven't really practiced much. So it's something new for me. So I started off with part one questions. Um, I did different, there was what I wanted to do was I wanted to like answer those questions like spontaneously first and see if I liked my answers. And then, well, obviously I didn't. I was recording myself, and when I listened to it, like there was too much hesitation. Like when I say hesitation, I'm talking about like it's too much hesitation for band nine. Like it was like a band eight type hesitation. So I didn't really like it, obviously. So I had to do the second or the third draft. But somehow I don't really recommend doing this, but for me, when I typed out my answers, like it really worked. And I'm going to show you. So these are the questions, right, for wild animals. Like, have you ever seen wild animals? What's your favorite wild animal? Do you like watching animals in the zoo? Is it important to, this is a tricky topic. This is, it has some tricky questions. And if you're not really prepared, and if you don't organize your answers, your response might come off a little bit of a little bit incoherent, so to speak, because what you say, like your answers should be in a logical, your idea should be in a logical order, like it has to be coherent. But when you say something spontaneous and when you're answering these tricky questions, you might, you know there is no penalty for going off topic, so it's okay if you go off topic, but there is a penalty for an incoherent answer. So that's why you want to build up your arguments. You want to answer the questions in a logical order, and also put your ideas in a logical sequence. So when I tried that, I think the coherence part was a bit problematic for me. It was the challenge. I didn't, obviously I didn't like the first draft, so I had to do the second draft as well. But after my second draft, I realized maybe I should just type out the answers and see what I really, for example, where I needed some improvement, right, in terms of vocabulary. I wasn't really looking up the words online, or I wasn't really, using a book. It's just I was just typing out and organizing my thoughts. Uh, and the trick is, here are the answers. For example, let me just show you real quick. I don't want you to, use my answers uh, for yourself, because they you wouldn't sound natural. So I don't really recommend, for example, memorizing these answers. I'm not saying these are the ideal answers. It's just my answers to the question, and I feel like sharing it with you, for you to learn this technique maybe. So the trick is you type as you speak, like you speak and then you like type out the words really fast, and try to make it like a speech, because there's a difference in spoken discourse, spoken English, and the written English. So you don't want to sound like a robot. You don't want to be using big words, or the words that are appropriate for writing. So for example, questions like, have you ever seen wild animals? Quite, very easy question. But if you don't organize your thoughts, it's just, you might, like I said, you just might keep repeating yourself, or you might just hesitate. So yeah, like I said, well, sure, I've seen them in the zoo, which is sadly pretty much the only place nowadays you get to see these amazing creatures. Unless, of course, you live near the jungle or something. So, what I'm trying to say is, you type out, even when you're reading your answer, like you don't want to be reading word for word. Like you just want to look at the answer, your words, the ideas, but pay attention to your pronunciation because you want to sound natural. Uh, and So it wouldn't come out naturally if if you don't watch out your pronunciation. So I prepared these answers, but this is not something that I want to memorize. Again, just to be clear, this is not something to memorize. It's just for me to organize my thoughts so that I would sound more coherent, more fluent. Um, for example, for questions like these, like, is it important to let children know about animals? I mean, like answering like, well, yeah, we need to teach them about how these animals play a key role in nature. Plus, that's the only way to educate our kids about the importance of conservation programs. And you never know, maybe someday they might become a key figure in wildlife conservation. Because some children discover a passion for something early on and it may eventually turn into a very successful career. You see, like, even when you're reading, you want to be like, you want to act, you want to, reflect what you're saying, you want to reflect your emotions, we want to have everything like conveying the meaning. Your pronunciation should be conveying what you're trying to say. But if you, of course, I mean, hopefully this is just the first lesson, and this is for me the first day I'm practicing. But by the time we reach towards the end of the course, towards the end of the challenge, hopefully, we will, everyone, including myself, will develop a way to answer these questions more or less spontaneously, more or less, like more or less naturally and coherently. Um, and another reason why I did this is I wanted to show you this the vocabulary as well. Like, for example, topic related vocabulary that I used in my speech was, for example, for wild animals, was like jungle, nature reserve, in the wild. Like watching them in the wild, conservation programs, or you can say conservation schemes, conservation projects, wildlife conservation, again, like preserving wildlife, the ecosystem, like the biodiversity system, the ecosystem, the whole nature, species. You can also pronounce it as species. It's up to you. Food chain. Food chain is another nice term that a lot of wildlife specialists tend to use. And if you watch a lot of documentary, I'm sure you hear this word often. Feed on, to feed on, like to eat, right? So it's another. I wouldn't really say it's topic related, but at least in the context it is. So other useful phrase that I used was like to single someone or something out, like to single out. Like I couldn't really choose an animal, like a particular animal. So I used it like saying, well, I cannot really single out a particular wild animal, but if I had to choose, I'd probably go for. And when you, for example, let me just point out something real quick. For example, when you say something like I cannot really single out a particular, but I think if I had to pick, I'd probably, for in speaking, it's the opposite of writing. You want to use as many contractions as possible. Like you cannot, you shouldn't be saying the whole word for such contractions, like I would, I should, like I should have done, uh, if I had known. So instead of saying if I had known, like if I had known. So this is the part of the spoken language. This is the spoken discourse, and native speakers do that all the time, and they do it so naturally that some students also miss, when they hear the conversation or when they hear the dialogue, they're like, well, it's not grammatical. Yeah, it is grammatically appropriate, but they just, you just don't notice these little contractions. So make sure to get into habit of not pronouncing the whole word, but using a contraction where it's possible. Okay, so going back to the list of words or the useful phrases. So, but on the bright side. But on the bright side is a nice idiom. I am really not in favor of, for example, forcing idioms, but if you could use them naturally in the right place, why not? Have come a long way. Have come a long way is a nice idiomatic phrase, like to get to this improved state or developed state. Uh, Key figure, like an important person, they might, become a key figure. If it weren't for something, if very spoken, very natural, like if it weren't for you, or if it weren't for wild animals, it just means like without your help or without wild animals. To collapse. To collapse is just a fancy word for like to fall down, but I'm using it metaphorically. It's just a figure of speech. For one thing is quite, again, very spoken, very common among native speakers, especially when they want to introduce a reason, like the first reason for something. They usually say, well, for one thing, it's blah 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 blah. Intertwined. Intertwined is like connected, interconnected, like uh, mixed. I used it. Not sure if I used it appropriately, but I just liked it. I just liked the sound of the words. I was here. I was like, is it important to protect wild animals? Well, of course. If it weren't for wild animals, the whole ecosystem would collapse. I mean, everything in nature is intertwined. For one thing, the loss of a certain species would disrupt the whole food chain, thus affecting other plants and animals. Not long ago, for example, I read this article about spiders and how they help with agriculture by catching insects that would otherwise feed on crops. And it's just one example. I mean, every single living thing has a role to play. So you're using intertwined here. And also paying attention to the intonation, like up and down, rise and fall. So you need to learn how to speak in a manner where you're basically conveying a meaning. You mean what you say, and the meaning is clear from your pronunciation as well. And this is a band 9 pronunciation. Like it's not just correct pronunciation of words. I mean, it is important, but in addition to that, you also need intonation and stress, and they're called pronunciation features. The accent doesn't really matter. A lot of students ask about like whether they should have an American accent or a British accent. It doesn't really matter. I mean, just have your own accent. I don't really care about accent. But I understand when you're young, you're really fascinated by maybe a British accent or an American one. But just imitate whatever you like. If you want to have an accent, no problem. But even if you don't have an accent, that's not a problem for IELTS. The last word was to disrupt. Disrupt is mostly academic. Sometimes you want to show off, you want to use some big words, but not don't overdo it. Just again, if you are used to using these words in the right context and naturally, then yeah, go for it. So it would disrupt the whole food chain. Like it is the words here. So just came naturally. So this is my answer. It has been my answer for wild animals. I will let you do the work on your own for the second topic, which was music. So going back to the speaking. So the music. I've already prepared the answer, but I'm not going to share my answers for this just yet because I really want you to focus on and try to use the same technique. See if you could improve your answers and make it more natural, more coherent, paying attention to the pronunciation and everything. So as for the part two, it took me like 3 drafts until I was really satisfied, more or less satisfied. And I ran over time. It was like 2 minutes, 12 seconds, but I was just done. I mean, I did everything. The first time I tried, it lasted like it ran for 5 minutes. So I had to cut a lot of the unnecessary details. For part two, I just want to point out that you don't need to follow the bullet points, but you should, use them if you don't have enough details. And they're a really good guide. So again, you will listen to my part two. You could, I'm going to share my notes as well so that you could, follow it on your own. But here I just prepared some notes. I didn't really write out the speech. I just prepared the notes and I just spoke looking at my notes. And that's what you need to do in the exam as well. Just make sure that you speak at length and you show your ability to speak at length, and you need to, even though you don't have to speak for 2 minutes, but I think it's best and in your best interest if you could show that you could speak for up to 2 minutes without any interruptions. That would probably be to your advantage. But instead of just saying a pointless stuff like blah 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 blah, just organize your thoughts and make it more coherent, make it more interesting, like use a story if you have to. But again, hopefully you'll listen to what I had to say for part two, and we'll discuss some vocabulary there as well. I haven't really tried part three yet, but part three questions are not really difficult. I mean, not really different from part one questions, but they're more abstract. So here's the word of advice. I mean, if you're trying out the part three questions, make sure your answers are not really about you. Here in this part of the speaking test, forget about yourself. Don't give personal examples. Don't talk about yourself. The examiner wants to see whether you could express opinions, whether you could generalize, and whether you could basically justify what you're saying, So don't make it personal. Make it more abstract. Make it more general. And when you're answering this question, make sure to directly answer the question first and then provide a reason. Maybe extend by providing a reason and an example if necessary. And then always somehow try to tie it back to your original answer, just to kind of, as a way of, making it a summary, like always summarize and kind of bring the whole thing back, like loop back to your original answer, like direct answer. So that way it's more coherent. Again, coherence, even though it may not seem important in speaking, it's quite it's something that examiners pay attention to, and that's what you need to watch out for. And just to be clear, coherence means logical. So it's there with fluency in the first column. If in the public band scripters, if you look at fluency, it's also about coherence. So I think that is what I wanted to share. That's for now, and I will be sharing my responses, the audio version, later today. But I want you to try your answers, and I want you to be for example, I want you to be done with your answers before you see mine or before you listen to mine so that you can compare. All right, guys, then I'll probably talk to you later. I still haven't really worked on writing yet, but I'm sure I could probably spend about an hour or two to finish writing. It's okay, even if you don't really, stick to the time limits. Just this day, the first few days, it's okay, I guess. I mean, we should be analyzing, we should be reflecting on what we're learning and what we're doing. So it's okay if you, for example, spend a little more time than suggested. So feel free to spend more time, analyze, plan your answers for writing. I mean, I'll do a different video for writing as well as soon as I'm done. But for now, I've been working on speaking. So I'll see you guys later. Hopefully, it was useful. Let me know. I also have you could contact me. Most of my students, you could probably contact me personally, but I also run like IELTS, a Telegram bot where you could write to me if you have something to ask. But I think everything was clear, and just follow the suggestions. If you think they're useful, if not, then you just stick to what you do best. And I'm sure, I mean, there is no just right or wrong way. It was just my technique. It was just something that I wanted to share, something that I usually share with my students. All right, so uh, thank you for your attention.